Imagine living in a time when joint pain wasn't just discomfort, it was a curse. No doctors, no painkillers, no surgeries. Only bone-cracking winters and remedies made from boiling roots or bleeding veins. So how did people in the Middle Ages deal with arthritis, swelling, and broken bones? What did they do when their bodies began to betray them? The answers might seem strange today, but for them, it was survival. In the Middle Ages, physical labor was unavoidable. Whether you were a peasant, a blacksmith, a gatekeeper, or even a noble, your body was constantly at war with the earth, the cold, and the slow wear of time. Sooner or later, the joints began to fail, not from some dramatic accident, just a slip on wet stone, a long winter spent hunched by the fire, or simply old age. Knees would swell, backs would stiffen, fingers would no longer obey. There were no words for arthritis or degeneration, but the pain was real. They couldn't describe it in medical terms, but they felt every stabbing ache, every grinding motion. There were no specialists, no pills, no surgeries, but they didn't just accept the pain. Pain was a part of life, and because of that, they had to face it. When the pain started, medieval people didn't sit still. They looked for helps, from healers, sometimes from monks, sometimes from the old woman in the village who once cured her. Husband's aching legs with a boiled root and a whispered prayer. Treatment wasn't just about easing the pain. It was a battle against weakness, against helplessness. From muddy fields to dusty monastery shelves, from trembling hands to jars of ancient ointments, the search for relief began. This was the first step in a long, painful journey to find out how the people of the Middle Ages treated their aching bones. When joint pain struck in the Middle Ages, there were no hospitals to turn to at least not in the way we know them today. Instead, people sought out anyone who might offer relief. Sometimes it was a healer, sometimes it was a monk, and in some cases, it was someone far less expected. Traveling healers were a familiar sight at markets and crossroads. They carried leather satchels filled with dried roots, crushed bones, strange powders, and jars of thick, pungent oils. Part medicine man, part storyteller, and part salesman, their success often depended more on reputation than on results. Some were frauds. Others, surprisingly, knew enough to ease the pain if only for a while. Inside monasteries, healing took on a more scholarly tone. Monks studied illness through the lens of both scripture and ancient knowledge. Many transcribed medical texts from Roman and Greek sources, preserving herbal remedies and balancing theories of the body. They believed that health depended on harmony between the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Imbalance, they thought, caused disease including joint pain. But not everyone could reach a monastery, and not everyone trusted healers. In desperate times, people turned to an unlikely source, the town butcher. Why? Because butchers understood bones. They knew joints, tendons, and how the body came apart. Some were asked to set bones, wrap limbs, or even reset dislocated joints. There was no single definition of a doctor in the medieval world. Treating pain was a gamble. People with aching joints would turn to anyone who offered even a sliver of hope, and often that hope came from the most unexpected hands. The treatments used for joint pain in the Middle Ages often walked a fine line between medicine and superstition. With limited understanding of anatomy and no access to modern science, people relied on what they could see, feel, and believe. One of the most common remedies was animal fat, especially marrow boiled from cow bones. It was believed to carry the strength of the animal itself. Healers would mix the marrow with crushed herbs like comfrey, mugwort, or nettles, then smear the paste over swollen joints. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it just made the pain smell worse. Bloodletting was another go-to solution, based on the theory of the four humours. It aimed to restore balance by draining what was thought to be excess blood. Leeches were sometimes used. Other times, it was done with knives or lancets, right above the aching joint. It was painful, messy, and often made things worse but too many. It was a sign that something was being done. In other cases, people used heated stones, animal skins, or boiled thorns pressed directly onto the skin to draw out what they called bad humors. These treatments were sometimes mixed with religious rituals, prayers whispered during the procedure, or charms tied around the wrist to ward off the pain. There were even stranger cures. Some believed that wearing a dried toad in a pouch around the neck could absorb joint pain. Others drank wine infused with iron filings or bathed in water left out under the full moon. Pain pushed people to try anything. It wasn't all nonsense. Some treatments, like willow bark poultices, actually contained salicin, the natural compound that would one day become aspirin. But the difference between a cure and a curse was often luck. For the medieval sufferer, hope came in strange forms. And when every step felt like fire, even the strangest remedy was worth the risk. For many people in the Middle Ages, joint pain wasn't just a nuisance. It was a slow collapse of everything they depended on. When the knees swelled too much to bend or the back refused to straighten, there were no wheelchairs or walking aids. If your body failed, so did your place in society. Peasants who couldn't till the land were often left behind during harvests. Craftsmen with stiff hands could no longer work their tools. Even a minor injury could snowball into permanent disability. And in a world without safety nets, that meant poverty, hunger, and often isolation. Some believed that chronic pain was a punishment sent by God for sins committed in secret. Others saw it as a curse or a sign of demonic possession. People who limped or hunched were sometimes feared or mocked. They were pitied, yes, but they were also pushed aside. Those who suffered for too long could find themselves removed from the rhythms of daily life. They might be left to sit by the fire all day, or assigned only the simplest tasks. In some cases, families grew resentful, unable to support another mouth that could no longer labor. The pain wasn't just physical, it stripped people of their dignity. Still, not all responses were cruel. In small villages, neighbors often helped. Religious orders sometimes took in the disabled and fed them in exchange for prayers. But these acts of kindness were rare blessings, not guarantees. When the body gave out, the pain remained, and so did the silence. There was no diagnosis, no explanation, just the cold fact that one more person had been broken by time and toil. And yet, even then, many refused to surrender. In a time when pain was misunderstood and often feared, there was one place where knowledge still flickered like a candle in the dark: the monastery. Monasteries weren't just places of worship. They were libraries, gardens, hospitals, and laboratories, all under one roof. Monks who had devoted their lives to God also became caretakers of ancient wisdom. Hidden behind stone walls, they copied medical texts from Rome and Greece, works by Hippocrates, Galen, and other early physicians. These fragile manuscripts became lifelines for anyone seeking more than superstition. Inside the monastery gardens, monks cultivated healing herbs, comfrey to bind bones, willow bark to ease pain, angelica for inflammation. They wrote detailed recipes and recorded what worked, what didn't, and what caused more harm than good. In a world ruled by oral tradition, the written word became a powerful tool. Their treatments were based on the same theory of the four humors, but they applied it with more care. Rather than bloodletting at random, they considered diet, environment, and temperament. A monk might recommend warming salves for cold joints, or a tea made from yarrow to relieve swelling. It wasn't modern science, but it was a step closer to reason. For many suffering from joint pain, reaching a monastery was a turning point. It offered not just treatment, but dignity. The monks did not see pain as a punishment, but as something to be understood and relieved. The light they kept alive through ink, herb, and prayer would one day lay the foundation for real medicine. But for those living in their time, it offered something far more urgent: hope. Not everyone reached the monastery. Not everyone had a healer nearby. For many, joint pain became a lifelong companion, relentless and impossible to escape. When no help came, people learned to suffer in silence. They adapted. A farmer might bind his knee with scraps of wool soaked in vinegar. A mother with aching fingers might heat stones and hold them through the night. Old men carved walking sticks from broken branches and leaned on them like lifelines. These weren't cures. They were survival strategies. Some found relief in rituals. Prayers to saints like Saint Roch or Saint Hildegard were whispered with hope. Holy relics were touched or worn close to the skin. Others believed the pain was a test of faith, a cross to carry, a burden that would purify the soul. The family often became the only support system. Children would help lace boots or fetch herbs from the woods. Spouses learned how to rub sore joints with whatever oils they could afford. Neighbors shared what little knowledge they had, passing down remedies from grandmother to granddaughter, father to son. And still, there were those who had no one. The lonely, the forgotten. Their pain faded into the background noise of medieval life, of sight, and eventually, out of mind. But even among the forgotten, there was resilience. People found ways to move, to work, to live, not because they were stronger than us, but because they had no other choice. To suffer quietly was not a sign of weakness. It was survival in its rawest form. Pain in the Middle Ages was not rare. It was expected. It came with every step, every task, every year added to a weary body. For those who suffered from joint disease, it was often a slow and silent undoing. But even in the face of unrelenting pain, people did not simply give up. They experimented. They remembered. They passed on knowledge in whispers, in gestures, in handwritten scraps. They searched for healing not just in plants and prayers, but in each other. Their remedies may seem crude: no bone marrow, poultices, bloodletting, toad charms, but each one was born from the same human instinct we still carry today. The instinct to fight back, to try, even when the odds are impossible. Monks with ink-stained fingers, midwives with bundles of herbs, tired hands pressing warm cloth to swollen joints, all of them were part of the same story. A story of resistance, of survival. And perhaps that's the lesson they left us. Not every pain can be cured. Not every body can be restored. But every act of care, no matter how small, is a kind of defiance. In a world without mercy, they found meaning, and somehow they endured. History rarely remembers the quiet pain, the aching knees, the twisted backs, the swollen hands that never made it into the pages of legend. But they were there, carving fields, raising walls, carrying children, holding on through the centuries. They didn't have science, they didn't have relief, but they had each other, and a will to keep going, long after the body began to break. At Prehistoric, we tell the stories buried beneath the dust of time of pain, perseverance, and the quiet strength of the forgotten. If this glimpse into the past moved you, consider subscribing for more untold truths from our ancient world, because every scar has a story, and every story deserves to be heard.